Good evening all. I think we're on 7 o'clock, so thank you for your patience, waiting for the minutes to tick by. Very good to have a distinguished audience here this evening, including a couple of parish councillors and people well known to us. And thank you very much indeed for coming along to this meeting and finding your way through Thorndon Hall and the various activities that are going on. So good to see them. So welcome to Thorndon. Some housekeeping issues before we begin. We're not expecting the fire alarm to sound this evening, but if it does, please leave the building through the fire exits and meet outside at the fire assembly point. Councillors will be using tablet devices to access the agenda for the meeting. Be aware, it's not that they're looking on other activities, but this is our standard methodology for saving paper. We always welcome people speaking at this meeting, although it is a formal committee meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council and not a public meeting. The members of the public who have registered to speak will be invited to speak at the relevant agenda item, although in fact I don't think actually anybody has registered a desire to speak. But because we're an informal approach and we want to get the best out of this meeting, if there is a burning desire to speak, we would give that sympathetic consideration. When the light is amber, people who are speaking can only speak for a further 30 seconds out of a total of 3 minutes. People wishing to speak on an item on the agenda are able to do so before the debate starts. Once the debate has started, however, it isn't possible to invite or receive comments from the floor. We don't tolerate any disruption at these meetings, and I need not say that with this glorious audience that we have this evening, but we have a constitution, we'll stick to it, and I'm sure everybody will be courteous and considerate. This meeting will be recorded and uploaded to the Council's website. If any members of the public prefer not to be recorded, then do please contact a member of staff. If you are planning on filming or recording the meeting, then do please let us know so we can ensure that you are not filming members of the public that do not wish to be filmed. The Chair reserves the right to ask any filming considered to be intrusive to be stopped. More information on this is available on the Council's website. That's the preamble, so we can now begin the proper meeting. And the first item is apologies. Catherine?
We have apologies from Councillor Buckley.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? If so, please indicate now, and when called, please state the nature and the reason of your interest, and of course declare any interest during the course of the meeting. So, Councillor Groves.
Okay. Chair, just to declare an interest in the property adjacent to me has a planning application which this committee is considering, so I won't be taking any part in that debate.
Fine. I think you would be allowed to make an opening statement if you wish to, but you certainly are not allowed to participate in the active debate, so thank you for registering that. Right, we could now then move to the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of November 22. Can I have a proposer for these as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Broadhurst. And can I have a seconder? Thank you, Cllr Attrill. All agreed? Everybody happy with the minutes? Yes, everybody's got their hands up. Thank you very much. So that brings us to public participation. You can debate, raise any areas that you wish to now, but I think this has already been made clear that nobody wishes to speak at this juncture. Thank you for that. We then move on to my chair's report, which I hope is not too wordy, but I have taken the precaution of writing it because there are several sensitivities in it. And I will ad-lib on a couple of items. Firstly, residents have been hugely inconvenienced by the problems that Southern Water have created twice in the last 3 months. Particular cases have been taken up by councillors, and we're grateful for that. And this situation should not have arisen at all, and certainly should not have arisen twice. Eastleigh Borough Council's response has been robust in terms of assisting with the situation and communicating to residents what's been going on, in some ways better than Southern Water have managed to achieve. And they are taking a leading role in holding Southern Water to account. There is a letter from all affected councils in the area, including signed by Keith House as our council leader, and this has made the points clearly and should lead to a robust post-mortem of this most unfortunate series of episodes. The next item I'd like to mention, which is certainly covered in Ross McLean's LAC manager's report, is the proposal to assign a 5.2k budget of developers' contributions to artwork. Now, a very productive meeting took place last week, which unfortunately, the week before, unfortunately I couldn't be there because I was housebound with COVID. However, several of the people who are in the audience were there, and it was a very constructive meeting. And I'd like to particularly mention Stuart Allen and his very strong historical knowledge and interest in the subject, and Gareth Davis, who also is involved in our historical societies. The gist of what we're looking at is that we would wish in some way to remember the history of the Polish resettlement camp on the Hiltingbury wreck after the Second World War. Now, in this meeting that took place, which I think is nice balanced representation from our community, mention has also been made of the Guernica children, which there was a recent exhibition on in the library in Chandler's Ford. And those of you will, I mostly know, that we had 4,000 Guernica refugee children come by boat and were camped in Eastleigh. Down by, it's been discovered by Stuart where the current LD site is, or very adjacent to that. And so there has been a meeting which involved Vicky Furr, who is the Eastleigh Borough Council Arts Officer. We hope that that group will continue to be a core part of the consultative process, representing 2 historic societies, and also with the benefit of parish councillors on it. The position is still fluid and is not limited to indoor art, because at one stage we were thinking that would be the most effective way of having some representation. And I'll tell you why, but we're not restricted to that, and the process will continue, but we do want to get up ahead of steam. We want to get on with it. We don't want to spend years talking about it and wasting money on consultations excessively. We want to cut to the chase and get something visible done, because this has been talked about for 5, 6, 7 years to my certain knowledge. And several of the people involved in the process are folk who actually were resident on that resettlement grant and now living in Hiltingbury. So really good to have them involved as well. But the reason that there's some concern about it being an external monument or whatever is because of the risk of graffiti and the risk of damage. I'm very mindful that on Hiltingbury Wreck we had considerable problems with the trees last year, just vandalised for the sake of it. You know, we're all believers in planting more trees, and we've had such a job to protect those trees. They've been vandalised several times. Sad to say, the notice board on Hiltingbury Road as you go into Hiltingbury Wreck has been repeatedly graffitied, which is most unfortunate because it's been advertising warm room activity, community activities, and it's just so negative that we have a very tiny, tiny minority of people who consider it fun to create cost and disruption for the community. As a matter of interest, the parish council facilities manager, who's responsible for those particular signs, because there's another one by the, Lakewood Road as well, which is also being graffitied, is trying to find some longer-term solution. And several of my councillor colleagues have pointed out that it isn't just limited to signs, although signs are particularly annoying because it defeats the whole object of people being able to read what's behind the glass panel. But other areas have been graffitied as well, so we take a dim view of that. The next item I'd like to mention is the vexed question of the lack of a bus service since the collapse of the X6 and X7 in November. And this is the issue which has been the biggest and most worrying to me in my mailbox. I've literally had people knocking on the door saying, not necessarily for themselves, but for their neighbours who are housebound, who are marooned at home, being able to get a bus service up and running again is absolutely critical to us operating as a civilised, supportive community. It's also important in terms of saving the planet, by getting better access to the main arterial route of the number 1 bus service between Winchester and Southampton, and of course getting access to Eastleigh. So I would like to pay tribute to the work Tim Groves has been doing, Councillor Tim Groves, to try and secure, in very difficult circumstances, of very limited council funding, a route through. And I am very confident that if our parish council row in the manner in which I hope they will at their meeting of 20th of March, that we will, by May, have a bus service up and running to provide that linkage so important to North Millersdale, South Millersdale, Scanterbout, and the whole Bodycoats Road area. The whole of our area needs to be supported with a bus service which will be a 1-year trial and which bus passes can be used on, and it is then up to the public to use it. To use it for the sake of yourself and saving the planet, and even more for the benefit of your next door neighbour who had to give up their car 2 years ago. Sadly, quite often people living on their own now, for whom it is an absolute lifeline. So I do beseech parish councillors to give this their support when it comes to the meeting on the 20th of March. We continue to get very good feedback on the Flexford Path enhancement and the opening out of Hiltingbury Lakes, and this has been a very substantial improvement in access for people, particularly with mobility challenges. In the latter case of Hiltingbury Lakes, there's still some modest dressing work to be completed on the footpath on the west side of the lake, and that will take place in the spring. The LAC part-funded improvements to the footpaths on Hiltingbury Wreck are also in good use, and it's noted the parish council, as part of this funding, are committed to completing the Shale Path at the western end, completing the circuit round the whole of the Hiltingbury Wreck. We are also at the LAC funding a shale cycle-friendly path on the Friarn Wreck, which will enhance the route from Central Precinct to Friarn and will encourage cyclists to use this safer route to Thorndon, a project which is supported by this school and the headmaster of this school as well. That is going to be something which will have to be done in stages, but it would be a significant step forward to have a legal, legitimate cycleway across the Friarn Wreck from the Craven Road end to the top end where the pavilion is. I then will go off script, we'll mention warm rooms ever so briefly. This is an initiative by 2 of our churches and 2 of our community associations, which we launched in December with a grant from Hampshire County Council, with the core organiser being the Hiltingbury Community Association. It's really been very good. We've mentioned the Guernica children, we've mentioned the Polish camp. It's an opportunity to mention the 66 Ukrainians we have living in Chandler's Ford, for whom this has been a very beneficial opportunity for people to engage, to meet, very often young mums who are only able to work part-time, if at all. And it's also been used by other members of the community, and I commend the Hiltingbury Community Association for the key role it took in organising this. So that concludes my chair's report. Now could I move over to Ross McLean to report on the local area manager's report. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Yep, I'll go through my report. I've got 7 recommendations in total, which I'll run through quickly and then give a brief summary of each one of those as well. So the first one was to allocate £1,000 for 3 community grants that were applied to us back in September, and I'll go through those 3 in a moment. Secondly is to note the spend of the £470 from the planting of the blackthorn hedge behind 96 Hursley Road. So members, we've talked about that at great length in recent team meetings. Thirdly, to approve the allocation, as James has alluded to, of the £5,155 of developer contributions for the public art project in and around Hiltonbury Sports Centre. Number 4 was to approve the allocation of the installation of 2 dual waste bins on the 2 areas mentioned. Also number 5 was to approve the allocation of a new replacement bench on Brownhill Road. And also talking about the cycle paths and the allocation of funds we've used from the New Homes Bonus and some reallocation of previously now finished projects to install the provision of a new cycle path across Fry and Wreck. And then finally, to approve and discuss the Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury Local Area Action Plan for 23-24. So just briefly on those points, just taking the grants application in process, we opened the grant opportunities back in September, closed at the end of October, received 7 applications in total. A subcommittee of members and officers reviewed the applications that we received, so 7 in total, and we agreed to fund 3 applications that were suggested. Those were the Chandler's Ford Scouts Group, the Happy Bunch Over 70s Club, and Knightwood BMX Club. We've written, well, subject to approval, we will write out to all those groups and work with those successful to get the good news stories and highlight some of the things that are the good impacts they're having in the local community. As we touched upon earlier, the hedge planting has taken place, so it's just to notify members that this is the spend. It was finally calculated at £470, and it's a mixed hedge at 1.2 that will hopefully go to 1.2 to 1.5 metres, and that's been planted literally just a couple of weeks ago. So moving on to the public art project, as James has kind of alluded to, our new public art officer has already created a mini project initiation document and has met with some local residents and members as well to discuss the scope of the project. I think there's already a sort of a clear shaping of what it will look like. I think the exciting thing probably is to think about it could grow with external funds that Vicky's very keen to sort of go after. So what we're asking for today, we do have some developer contributions left over for Chandler's Ford, which totals just over £5,151, and we'd like to allocate that towards this particular art project. And then, as we've talked about before, the bins have been identified as key issues in those 2 areas that are on the report. They've been assessed by Street Scene and our local engagement officers, and the recommendation is to replace them with no dual waste bins. As we put so many in quite recently, you'll know what type of bin we're talking about. And that leads us on to the cycle path at Fry and Wreck. I know we've been working really hard on this since probably the best part of 18 months to coming up to 2 years with support from Cllr as well as an officer at EBC. We have managed to, working with the finance team, find some old pots of money, as it were, to be able to fund this project. We've taken the help of some of our engineers as well to get a clear steer of what we can and can't do. And we're hoping with this money that allocated, we can start the work late spring, early summer. And it is a fairly straightforward project, I'm reliably informed. So it's approximately a £17,000 project that's been we're asking the funding for, and we've got the money to do that. And then finally, it's the local area action plan that we have discussed at other team meetings in the past. I think there's approximately 9 or 10 different key priorities that we've set ourselves. Now would be the time to discuss them, and they obviously go live from April the 1st. One of them on there that Councillor Tim Groves has highlighted, it says conduct a feasibility study of Lower Flexford. Probably the wrong terminology. We need more of a detailed scoping design work is what we need for Lower Flexford. And it is going to be quite a lot of partnership discussion about working in a floodplain, as it were. So certainly a lot of work to be done, and then there's going to be the need to find some funding to do it. But certainly if we can get the work with the likes of Aquascience, Hampshire County Council and other key partners, we at least understand a plan moving forward, and we'll find the funding hopefully someday. But the rest of these on here that you would have seen before, they're all fairly, they shouldn't be new to you as such. We certainly want to get that Hiltingbury Lakes project finished this summer after some delays through various reasons. And likewise, the transfer of Hutt Farm Place is another one that we should be trying to aim for. This time next year would be nice. There's a lot of cycle stuff on there around EV charging points we want to put in, which shouldn't be any cost to us, working with EBC, and also those cycle Sheffield stands that we allocated funding for in March 2021. We need to see those installed rather quickly, would be good. So we need to identify the locations with the support of the likes of Cali and Co. And I think that's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Excellent report. Thank you very much indeed, Ross. So it's now open to members for questions. Must be some, surely. Huh? All right. Well, okay. We've got a question, and then
Well, less of a question. I'm just like to state how delighted I am at last we've managed to reinstate the hedge that was so brutally removed by a landowner, albeit unfortunately at our cost. But nevertheless, it's nice to see the habitat restored back to nature as it should be, and I'm hopeful that it will remain in place now.
indeed. Well, in that case, if there are no more questions, can I have a proposer? Alan Broadhurst, and a seconder, please. Tim Groves. Any debate? No? No debate? Going, gone. All those in favour? I should just declare that I do have an interest in the one item, actually, which the Friarn Community Association, the Happy Bunch is an affiliate, part of that, and therefore I really shouldn't be voting on the £250 which has been assigned to the Happy Bunch. So could you exclude me from that vote, which is obviously still carried? Thank you. So on that basis, we can now move on to the presentation on planning guidelines. Thank you for your patience.
That's quite all right, Chair. Thank you very much. Good evening, members. It's been a while since I've done a Chandler's Full Committee. It's bringing back happy memories. Right, quick presentation on planning guidelines for this evening's one item. Just to remind members what you need to take into account when determining a planning application. The application must be considered on planning grounds or determined on planning grounds in line with the development plan, unless there are material considerations which indicate otherwise. The development plan in this instance is the Eastleigh Borough Local Plan 2016-36, which was adopted almost a year ago now. Also, although not relevant, is the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Plan. Other material considerations are any relevant government policy, principally the National Planning Policy Framework, the most recent version, which was 2021, which has a presumption in favour of sustainable development and has three threads: economic, social and environmental. Not entirely relevant to this evening's application, though. Also of relevance are any supplementary planning documents such as the Quality Places SPD, development and trees, residential parking standards, etc. Also of relevance is any planning history related to the site or previous decisions or applications related to that site, any appeal decisions on the site or in similar circumstances, any site-specific matters and comments or responses from consultees and third parties, and also any relevant precedents or case law. You do have the opportunity or ability to make a decision contrary to the officer recommendation if you choose to, whether that be an approval or refusal, or even to defer the application to seek further amendments or further clarification on particular points, although we would ask that the committee highlight what those are. And you do have the option to add further conditions if you wish or you think are relevant. Right, thank you, Chair. Pass it on to...
Thank you for that outline. And I do understand that actually there are a couple of folk who will very much welcome after the meeting having an informal chat with you about planning in general as opposed to this specific case. So thank you very much for agreeing to do that, Gary, as well. Now, I believe, Councillor Groves, you're permitted to stay for Dorothy's presentation and then you need to leave the room. I think that is correct, isn't it? Yes. All right, so over to Dorothy, so the presentation of the particular application for 29 Grosvenor Road.
Thank you, Chairs. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dorothy, Planning Officer. Agenda 8 is a householder planning application for 29 Grosvenor Road, and this application seeks approval for a single-storey side and rear extensions following the demolitions of the existing detached garage. The reasons of sending to tonight's meeting because the immediate neighbours is one of the members of the committee. To provide some context to the proposal, we have got the plans on screen. So this is the application site, and you can see here outlined in red. The application property is a 2-story detached house with a gable roof detached garage to the side. The property is set back from the road with a paved driveway parking space and a side gate leading to the rear garden. The application site also lies within the Kingsway Special Characters Area, but as long as sufficient garden depth and area is retained, no mature trees will be damaged, and the design of the new development can fit well into the overall street scenes, the proposal will be considered acceptable. The proposed development is a L-shaped single-story side and rear extension, but most of the work is to the side. Only it will extend around beyond the rear wall by around 1 meters. The proposal will also move the building away from the common boundary because given that the flank wall of the existing garage is part of the common boundary between the application site and the adjacent property, 10 Cllr Road. So should the application be successful, a section of 1.8 fencing will be built to infill the gap following demolitions of the existing garage. And we can see that the front portion of the side extension is used as a workshop, and the rear part is used as adjoin the rear extension to enlarge the existing dining and family room. In relation to the visual impact, although the proposed extension will be visible from the street scenes, but we can see that it will be significantly set back from the road and will be situated in a similar location with the existing garage, so it will not form a prominent features along the street scenes. These are the other angles at the application site. We can see that the existing garage is well screened by the hedgings and the tall trees. So as same as the proposed development will be the same, it will be only visible when you stand in front of the application site. In terms of the design, this is the front elevation. The proposed development will match the properties in terms of the matching materials and fenestration, so it will suit the property well. We can also see that there will be used the existing garage door as well, so the application property will do not look very different with the existing. The proposal will not harmful to the characters of the host dwelling and the wider surrounding area. For the residential amenity, the most affected neighbors by the proposed development is 10 Cllr Road, but we can see that this photo is taken from the neighboring garden, and 10 Cllr Road is angled away from the application site, so the separation distance is sufficient to mitigate any harm. From the site visit, I can also see that there is substantial natural screening obstructing the views of the proposed development. As what I have mentioned before, because the flank wall of the existing garage is part of the common boundary between the application site and the adjacent neighbors, so once the garage has been demolished, the new building will be moved away from the boundary and attached to the house, so it will enable a gap to the boundary line, and which is considered a very good practice. So overall, given that the single-story natures of the proposed extension, sufficient separation distance on both properties, and the new 1.8 meters boundary fence and the substantial nature screening obstructing the views of the proposed development, it is considered that the proposal will not cause any significantly harmful impact on the amenity on the neighboring properties in terms of overshadowing, loss of privacy, or loss of light. So during the consultation period, we haven't received any objections, comments from any neighbors as well. So for the highway safety and parking provisions, given that no additional bedroom is proposed because the site extension is used for the workshop and enlarge the existing dining room, so no additional parking spaces is required, and it will not impact on the existing car parking arrangement. So this is my brief assessment, which I have discussed throughout the presentation. In conclusion, the proposal is in complete accordance with the EBC local plan, and there are no specialist consultees objections. Also, it has no unacceptable impact on the amenity of the neighboring properties and will not detrimental to the characters of the area. There are no additional parking spaces are required as well, so the parking provision can be met. So therefore, the recommendation is to permit subject to the condition as set out in the agenda. Thank you very much for listening. I have nothing further to add unless there are any questions.
Thank you very much for a very clear and lucid presentation. So the question is now that I think we would ask Councillor Tim Groves to leave the room because he is the adjacent neighbour and he has had the opportunity to make some remarks at the beginning but has chosen not to. I'll now call upon councillors for questions in the first instance on the application. Councillor Pragnell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that the applicant is applying for the new garage or the structure in place of the garage to be described as a workshop. In this application, there's no suggestion that this is going to be a change of use into a commercial workshop, is there? This remains a residential property.
Yes, we can impose a condition to restrict the use of the garage to the workshop.
I would just jump in on that before we start adding conditions. The predominant use of the site will be residential, and it's a domestic workshop. If the applicant chooses to use it for their business, for instance, working from home, there's nothing wrong with that. If it starts causing issues for neighbours, and I'm sure we'll hear about it given who the neighbour is, we can investigate if need be and take action if needed. But in this instance, I would just count it as a hobby workshop for tinkering and man cave or whatever.
Any more questions? Before I ask for a proposer, a seconder,
Yes, I propose that we permit this development. It would normally have been decided as by our officers. It only comes to the meeting, which is council policy, that if a council member, councillor, or a council officer is a neighbour or lives close to the property, that for the sake of clarity, that such decisions must be made by the committee, because to give the public some assurance that there can be nothing sort of going on behind the scenes. So that's why it's here. It is actually quite a moderate extension. Looking at the plans, the height that won't change significantly, if at all, from the existing garage. So once it is finished, because you've got the archway linking, it won't actually appear any different. It will actually appear slightly narrower because of the gap then to the boundary, which I think will actually improve the street scene. So I'm quite happy to propose that we permit, with the conditions as they are in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Broadhurst. Could I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Pragnell.
I will second that motion as written. Thank you.
Right, so again, in the interests of public scrutiny, we now move to whether there is actually any discussion on the application. Is there any debate which anybody wishes to enter into? I will add my pennyworth then, because I do think the points are well illustrated by the diagram up, and actually the other one that you had from the garden of the neighbour, showing that the inclination makes it slightly less intrusive and provides, that's exactly right, and provides a very good separation and is fitting to the location. So I'm allowed to have a view, but only after others have spoken. So if there's no more debate, can I ask for all those in favour? We're unanimously in favour, and therefore there are obviously no extensions. Right, we're able to bring Councillor Groves back in. Thank you, Tim. So we now move to the TROs, and we're going to have a presentation on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm here to present what will be the final TRO that Eastleigh does for the committee. So engineers were asked by councillors to investigate road safety, obstruction or nuisance parking problems for various roads in the Chandler and Hiltingbury area. New or amendments to existing parking controls were proposed, and a statutory consultation to introduce these restrictions was advertised on the 9th of December 2022. Consultation was undertaken by means of a public notice on Eastleigh Borough Council's website, the Hampshire County Council Public Notices portal, published in the Hampshire Independent newspaper and posted on street furniture in the vicinity of the proposed restrictions. Representations were received both in support of and objection to each scheme. The report summarises the comments received and gives engineers feedback and recommendations on how to proceed. I will now look at each of the sites in turn and ask councillors to make a decision to implement or withdraw the proposal. Please note, due to the agency agreement terminating, the option to defer a TRO won't be given at this committee. So the first site is Ashdown Road and Charnwood Crescent. This proposal looks to resolve issues with short-term parking on existing waiting restrictions adjacent to the parade of shops, and also issues with visibility when exiting the junctions of Charnwood Crescent. 4 representations were received, 1 in full support, and that came from Hampshire County Council's Passenger Transport Service. 3 others did support the proposals, but also wanted them to be extended to deal with verge parking and the damage that causes. The issue of verge damage is outside the scope of this report, but solutions can be investigated in due course at councillors' request once we've seen the result of the parking restriction if it goes ahead. So, did you want to take each site in turn?
Do you know, I think it would be good to have a quick summary of each of them and then us to revert back to it if we may, because this is a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? They are linked together.
They are. Okay. So the next site is Bodycotes Road. This proposal looks to resolve junction parking causing reduced visibility for drivers and pedestrians. Oh, goodness. 1 representation was received in support of this restriction, and that was from Hampshire County Council's Passenger Transport Service. The next site is Hoken Road and Kingsway Junction. This proposal purely reinforces the provisions of the Highway Code in respect of junction parking, and no representations were received for this scheme. The next site is Meadbrook Gardens. This proposal is to improve access to Meadbrook Gardens by ensuring parking does not create a chicane effect at the entrance. 1 expression of support was received for this proposal. The next site is Oakmount Road. This proposal was in response to complaints about all-day parking in front of residential properties by people who work in nearby businesses. So what we were looking to achieve with this is a turnover of 3 parking spaces that can be used for short-term loading and unloading or visiting for the residential properties.
Is it possible just to zoom in or zoom out just so we can see the proximity to the other roads?
So Waitrose.
That's the entrance to Waitrose. Do you want to put your cursor over it like that? Yeah. Okay. And the final site is Heathfield Road, Heathfield Close and Walnut Close. This was a revocation request. The restriction was advertised in response to complaints to councillors that the surrounding roads were being impacted by verge parking since the zone was implemented. 6 representations were received to this, all objecting to the revocation. Thank you, Chair.
Fine. Do we have any questions on these? Yes, Councillor Pragnell.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Where we've been discussing all these, and of course you guys have all been very helpful in not discussing Meadbrook Road when I was around, and I've always not got involved, because of course I have an interest in Meadbrook Gardens. So for that I have to declare an interest for that particular one. I've no idea if you wish me to leave the room for that particular one. It would seem sensible for whilst you're discussing and the fate of my properties over around there, but yeah, I mean, I'd completely forgotten that we'd had Meadbrook Gardens in there because we've been concentrating on everything else when I'm around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, okay, fine. Well, thank you for registering that point. We won't require you to leave the room. Oh, okay. Well, evidently we will require you to leave the room. Are there any more questions before we move to a proposer and a seconder and then the debate? No? No more questions? Okay. Can I have a proposer then? All right. And a seconder? Cllr Attrill seconding, Alan Broadhurst proposing. And now it's time for us to have the debate. And if we could start on Ashdown Road, perhaps, and take these now in the light of the fact we've been able to see the whole picture one by one, and then ask you to leave the room for Meadbrook Gardens. So Ashdown Road proposition is been discussed several times at this committee previously, and indeed we were the ones that requested that there be some enhanced restrictions there. Yes, Councillor Pragnell.
Yeah, I'll get the ball rolling. I mean, we've been lobbied before by some of the residents, and in particular the council vehicles that have to try and negotiate that corner. It is a problem with vehicles parked on the corner. They should not be there, but I do understand there's a requirement for parking. However, when it becomes interrupting services and making the corner unsafe, I think it is implicit on us to do something. This may not be the actual perfect solution, but at least it gives us a starting point and we can adjust from there.
Councillor Broadhurst, you wanted to say something?
I was going to keep a little bit quiet on this one, but I'll echo the comments. You know, we've all seen the problems up there. We all know them, and your residents have requested it. And my view of such things is the residents often know better than we do because they see it every day. And I think it's, if the residents are requesting such action, then it's the right thing to do too.
Fine. Right, Tony made reference to the fact that, sorry, you, Tim, are you wishing to, yes, after you?
Yes, just thanks very much. Yes, no, I think we've got a good proposal here in preventing loading and unloading where there are already rating restrictions at the end of Ashdown Road. That's part of this proposal, I think. I think that should help to, if it's enforced, it will help to solve the problems we're having in that area. It does mean, there's nowhere to park near the shops except in the car park there, but I think that's what we have to accept for that area because of the congestion around there. That's the first part on this diagram, and then you've got also the end of, is the Charnwood Crescent, is Charnwood Crescent part of this same order? It is it?
Yes.
It is, yeah. So that's right. So you've got the two ends of Charnwood Crescent that we're preventing or proposing that there be a waiting restriction opposite the ends to help access and egress of traffic, and that will also be helpful. It will also mean that you can enforce, if people park on verges in those particular areas, you can enforce it and you'll be able to stop them parking by putting tickets on them if they do park on the verges where there are waiting restrictions. But of course it won't elsewhere in the area. I think what what we need to try and do is we need to try and encourage the residents to wish not to park on the road because they value the area they live in. And I think that's what we have to do throughout the whole of Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury. We have lots of verges in lots of areas, and I think Ashdown Road is one of them where we need to encourage residents not to park on the verge if we can't have a total parking restriction for the whole of Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury, saying that you know, that verge parking is not allowed. So that's my feeling on these three. I think they're good proposals that you've got for this particular order.
Fine. Any more debate on that one, or can we then move to a vote on it? I'd like to make a comment after we've voted, because I think there is a supplementary item that you raise which is worth investigating, but it's, as you've rightly pointed out, that is not the motion before us this evening. So can we take a vote on the recommendation on Ashdown Road? All those in favour, please? And that's everybody. Right, my footnote is that the verge parking issue does relate to actually down to Sycamore Road as well, Sycamore Avenue, on the corner there. And I would hope that we could investigate Dragon's Teeth or some solution in order to enable that problem to be dealt with. We've got a member of the public nodding their head enthusiastically, and we're grateful for that. And that wasn't a speech, but thank you for it. And I think, Ross, you would like to come in on this point as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Tony's alluded to, I think the proposals from the TRO perspective does address the safety issue. It's the issue, is the aesthetics of parking still on the verges and the destruction that it does. And I think the proposal that we could look at is something like Dragon's Teeth to be installed here. It doesn't require a TRO, and that is even the gift of members of this group to be able to fund the installation of 5, 6, 7 or so Dragon's Teeth that will stop and completely prevent people being able to park on the grass verges. It is commonplace in other areas, so Burston, Hamble and Hound Local Area Committee do use Dragon's Teeth quite significantly. And if we wanted to move on this quite quickly, we can have some discussion now. I can go ahead and work with our team to get that installed, and we can retrospectively approve the cost at the next LAC in June. So that's just some information for you to consider. Thank you.
Well, that's most helpful, and we would like that to be taken up, and we thank you for the suggestion, and that would hopefully then be endorsed at the next meeting. But we would want to make sure there's some consultation with all councillors to make sure that there's a common will and intent as to exactly where these Dragon Teeth would go. Thank you very much indeed for that intervention, Ross. So now could we move to the second one, which is the Bodycotes Road proposal? And the very appropriately named Spring Hill Road, because there is quite a lot of water round about in this area. So I think the presentation was clear, and the proposition is to extend the yellow lines there. Would anybody like to speak to that particular one? Tim Groves and then Alan Broadhurst?
Yes, I think this is a good proposal that avoids a problem of people parking on the corner and therefore making it dangerous and uncomfortable for drivers at that end of Bodycotes Road. So I think I would support this recommendation.
And Councillor Broadhurst?
Well, very enthusiastically support this. I actually came round the corner this afternoon, and it's been a problem for a long time. And at times, if someone parks quite a small pickup there, it completely blocks the view. So if you're coming in from Winchester Road, turning into Bodycotes Road, you've got cars parked right round the corner. You can't see whether there's anything coming the other way without pulling head on into them. And this really is a much needed addition, and I'm very pleased to see it.
Very good. All right, is there anybody else wishing to? Councillor Pragnell.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we perhaps haven't mentioned with this proposal is, with the change of the priority of the pedestrian now at junctions, it's imperative that the pedestrian can be seen. And with the vehicles parked in that area, it would be a very foolish thing just to presume that you have priority and step out. because your next port of call might not necessarily be where you thought you were going. This at least gives the pedestrians the view of the road, and the road the view of the pedestrian, which again restores the road back to the pedestrian where it should be. And this is a very busy housing estate. It's between two shopping centres and a main bus stop, so it is used a lot by pedestrians. And so this application supports and underlines the returning of the road to pedestrian.
Fine, very good. Let's hope we'll have buses there again soon. And yeah, I think it's also that's the double chicane, isn't it? Coming into Spring Hill from Winchester Road, you're having to do an S-turn, and this will help deal with that problem as well. So I don't think we need any more debate. Can we move to a vote? All those in favour? Very good. Thank you very much. Can we move on then to Hokum Road, Kingsway, please, Tony? Yep. You've said this is basically just a tidying up operation.
This just reinforces the highway code. The drivers shouldn't be parked within 10 metres of the junction. I think councillors have found that there is parking there. I think it's sometimes to do with a camp or something that goes on land opposite. And it does cause visibility problems. So that's why this site came forward.
Right. Councillor Groves?
Yes, I think this, similar to the last one, it's keeping the traffic away from the junction, from traffic being tempted to park too close to the junction, contrary to the highway code, which of course you can't legally enforce anyway, but it is what we're all advised to do in our driving test, to keep away from the junctions when we park. But I think also it will make it safer for traffic turning from Hokum Road into Kingsway, because there won't be cars parked right at the end of the junction there. So I would support this one as well.
Thank you for that. Anybody else wish to speak on it? Councillor Broadhurst?
I'll just pick up on what Councillor Groves said for members of the public. If you park within 10 metres of a junction, it is in contravention of the highway code, and it is enforceable, but only by the police. And that's the problem. By putting double yellow lines around like this, it means that the local authority can enforce it. So it gives stronger enforcement. The police can still enforce it because they're still in contravention of the highway code. Mm-hmm. It means that there's someone else who can enforce it, and which is sadly all too often needed, I'm afraid.
Fine. Any more debate? Actually, it's become increasingly relevant to my mind because I know that Kingsway is more often being used as an alternative to people having the Hiltingbury Road, Winchester Road junction. This is quite often seen as a better route to get to the roundabout at the top of Winchester Road. And that's an additional reason for enforcing this. So can we move to a vote? All those in favour, please. Very good. Thank you very much. So now we have to ask you to leave the room, contrary to what I thought. Councillor Groves for Meadbrook Gardens. All right, so Councillor Groves.
Yes, I probably should have raised this before. It's probably a question to the officer. I don't know whether would it be appropriate to ask a question at this stage?
100%, yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Just I was a little concerned that this was on the entry to the road rather than the exit. The restrictions are on the entry rather than the exit, so it doesn't make it that easy for traffic if it comes from Mead Road going into Meadbrook Gardens, because there's going to be waiting, no waiting on the opposite side of the road. Therefore, there could be parking adjacent to the property to the north there. I think probably we're okay by going ahead with this because there's so little traffic that uses Meadbrook Gardens. But I just a question as to why we're on that side of the road and not the other side of the road with the waiting restrictions, please. Thank you.
The answer to that is because the waste collection vehicles are rear steer, and it gives them the sufficient room with allowing the maximum parking. And because it is so low speed and infrequent movement, we don't see that as being too much of an issue.
Thank you.
Satisfactory answer?
Yes,
Councillor Groves?
yes. I take your point about the waste vehicles and being sort of on the outside of the bend type issues. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other comments or points to debate on this one? Yes, Councillor Broadhurst.
Well, just to add to that, again, we often get these requests, or we need to do it, because of inconsiderate parking by residents who then complain that their waste isn't collected when they're the ones who've parked and blocked the road so the vehicle can't get down there. It happens in my own close where I live, all too frequently, and this one has been a problem for a very long time, which is why we had to introduce something a while ago, and even that hasn't solved the problem, so we've had to do a little bit more, just because, so that we can give people, because it's not only the houses there, but of course there's a block of flats at the bottom, so there are quite a few residents in that little road, and we need to have reliable access. And the people in the flats, some of them are my age, old, and they tend to need things like ambulances more often, and there have been problems down there. So very glad to see this. Thank you.
Right. Any further debate on this one? All those in favour? Very good. Thank you very much. We then move on to Oakmount Road. Just remind us of where we're at, Tony.
Okay, so this was complaints from residents about all-day parking by people that were perhaps working in the nearby businesses. I think Waitrose was mentioned, and a couple of the shops in Friar Arcade. That meant that residents that lived along Oakmount Road were struggling with short-term parking provision for visitors, carers, and just unloading shopping and things. They have got rear access, all of those properties. So in terms of longer term parking provision, that is there. It's more that pop in and drop something off that we're trying to achieve. So we've done Monday to Saturday, 8 till 4, 2 hours, no return in 2 hours. 2 hours is normally sufficient for a carer's visit if required.
Excellent. Tim Groves?
Yes, I think this is a good proposal. A little bit of concern that it might be used not by carers but by people calling in at Waitrose or the shops nearby instead of that. But I think this is a good compromise, and I think I think it'll help the situation for the residents there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Broadhurst?
I think we also, the houses there, it is quite a steep bank at that point in front of them, so that if you want to get out of your near side door, you haven't got a chance because you've parked against quite a steep bank. So, but it is bad there, and quite frankly, I frequently see people parked on the double yellow lines, even close to where we've got the central reservation. So if anything bigger than a small private car comes along, you can't get through there. So any restriction which gives some assist the situation, it's got to be a good thing. But my only concern, looking straight at Tim as the county councillor for the area, as and from April, patrolling of such things will be with the county council, not ourselves. And particularly with new restrictions, they are going to need to be enforced pretty rigidly early on to get the message through. And I just hope that Tim can use a bit of pressure there for that. Thank you.
It's a point well made. I mean, I've been lobbied by a number of residents in that area saying parking is utterly impossible for them, and small children and all the rest of it. It's good that the lollipop lady further down the road is reinstalled, or happens to be a lady. The lollipop person has been back in place since January. I had a chat with her the other day, and that seems to have helped a lot at school time. But even up at this far end, the congestion and the just sheer line of parked cars permanently there is a definite problem. So I think, may we move to a vote? All those in favour? Very good, thank you very much. Then we finally come to Heathfield Road, Walnut Close, etc., where there was a proposition to revoke the restriction that we put in some 3 or 4 years ago. I was on the council, so it must have been no more than 4 years ago. And we've had a good explanation as to why that was done at the time. I'll reserve my remarks for later on, but I think it's notable that there had been 6 objections, I think you said, to the removal of the restriction signs that we have there. So over to colleagues first. Tim Groves.
I think what I would like to see, which isn't in our control, is I would like to see a prohibition of parking on verges and footways throughout Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury at the parish boundaries. But it is something we can't do because we don't have the powers to be able to do it. If anyone were to be able to do it, it would be Hampshire County Council, who would have to put signs up on all the entries to the parish, and every way from every other area into the parish. Yeah. Because we don't have a national policy. What even better, of course, is what is really needed for the country is a policy by the country as a whole that you can't park on verges and pavements on footways. At the moment, they have that rule in London, but we don't have it for the rest of England. And I think there are moves, there is consideration of that issue, but it certainly hasn't been brought in yet, so we can't enforce it. So that's what I think is the ultimate solution for the whole of Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury, and that includes Heathfield Road. But it also includes Ashdown Road, it also includes Hiltingbury Road, and lots of other roads as well. Yeah. The problem we have, I think, here, and the reason why we need to remove this restriction, is the end of restriction signs that we have. Like in the picture to the right, you've got an end of no verge parking sign, which sort of is like red rag to a bull to adjacent residents to say, I can park on the verge because I'm past that sign. And I think that's what we're trying to do in this, is we're trying to remove those signs so we don't have a restriction and make Heathfield Road any different to any other road. For example, Ashdown Road or Hiltingbury Road or Sycamore Avenue or Nickel Road, which is the one on the other side. So that's why I think this is a good proposal by our officers here. Thank you.
Yes, but could I just, Tony, the recommendation in the light of the objections was to keep the restriction in place, I think, was it?
Yes, it was. And that's because we've done some further investigation and we are able to change the signs. Ah. So you can keep your existing restriction in place and change to the small yellow signs on verge, which may not be... well, they're certainly not as big as those signs there. And I think you have them elsewhere in this area. So
yes, on Hiltingbury Road, I think,
yeah,
for example.
So that's an alternative choice. So you can keep the restriction, but sign it in a much smaller way. Whether or not you could do it on an experimental basis. So the signs could be taken down and stored without changing the TRA. So for this in particular, we're only looking for you to make a choice on the revocation or not, and we can then talk about the signing afterwards.
Ah,
okay,
fine, okay. Councillor Broadhurst?
If you want me to propose something, I'll propose that we do not revoke the order, that we retain it, and that we do ask our officers to consider the smaller signs. I know that the smaller ones have been used in Oakmount Avenue and the Bend where we had problems, and I'll just answer a couple of things that people have said. People make this false statement that there is no law against parking on the pavement. There is. Again, it's one of those that comes under the highway code, and it comes under the law of obstruction. It doesn't say you can't park on the pavement, it says you can't obstruct the pavement because it's part of the highway. But again, the problem is that only the police can enforce it, and the government are now making it possible for local authorities to take action against such parking, which I think is probably why the county council are taking back, partly why they're taking back control, because they'll be able to do it for the whole county then. And hope that they do actually do that. It would be far more useful if they can. But when people say that there isn't a law against parking on the pavement, it's true, there isn't a law, but there is a law that says you must not obstruct it, which amounts to the same thing. People ignore that law. And in fact, if people are caught in contravention of it by the police, it's a £90 fine and 3 points on the licence, which we should discourage a few if the police had the time to enforce it, which they don't. But I think on this, and the other thing I would also say to Councillor Groves is, I've been on this committee a long time, and I was on it when we first introduced the verge parking restrictions in Bodycoats Road and in Knee Road. And at the time, we wanted to do a blanket then for the whole area, and it was the county council who told us, no, you're only allowed to do small target areas, which is why we've had this policy ever since. So I hope that that's something else that we can...
Right.
You can work on as our county council, please.
Well, just for clarity, the officer's recommendation is that we do not revoke, and the supplementary item that has been raised by you, Councillor Broadhurst, is that we ask officers to investigate some signage which doesn't remove the no verge parking restriction, but takes account of the points that Tim Groves has raised, which is that when you come to the end of it, it rather implies you can verge park. Is that in essence is what's being proposed? That's clear to everybody? Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pragnell. We want to have a little bit of debate on that, Tim Groves?
I think I would like to propose an amendment that we do revoke this order. So I would like to propose to the meeting that we have an amendment that we do revoke the order on Heathfield Road, because we still don't have an order on Ashdown Road, and we need an order on Ashdown Road if we have one on Heathfield Road in the future, in my view.
Right. Well, we've got an amendment proposed, but do we have a seconder for that amendment? It doesn't look as if we do have a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Groves, do you accept that?
I will have to, won't I? But
I think you will have to, yes.
But that is my view.
That is your view, very clearly expressed.
And as your county councillor, as Mr. Broadhurst keeps on reminding me. Thank you. Cheers.
All right. Well, I think if is there any more debate? We have a clear proposal, which is that we take officers' recommendation of not revoking, but we request that officers investigate the possibility of getting rid of this cliff edge of the restriction now being over. And that sign is as bold as brass. Councillor Groves wants to come in with a supplementary remark, and then we're going to move to a vote.
Yeah. Just to remind members and that we are talking about small signs being erected, but that means we've got to put extra posts in for all these small signs in the verges as well. So if I'm correct, if Tony can clarify whether that is correct.
We will utilise street furniture where possible to minimise, but there is a chance that we will have to put in some posts, yeah.
And then so we're going to, basically the idea is that you retain street signs. Sorry, you retain and you put up these street signs in Heathfield Close and Heathfield Road all the way round, if you haven't got lampposts. But I suppose there are lampposts in that area, so it won't be quite as bad as I think new signs in. Yeah, thank you.
The decision for tonight is revoke or not revoke. That's what we're going to vote on, because that's what's before us. With the supplementary that we investigate doing these various other alternative arrangements, but we're not voting on those tonight, and those would be considered in due course. And I'll ask Tony to say a little bit about that in due course. Now, are my colleagues here, they're looking slightly quizzical. Are you happy with that?
Can we just have 1 minute to have a quick discussion? Yeah, we just need a minute to get this down. Do you want to turn your microphone off for a second, Jen?
Tony, could I say, we would ask you to make a little statement about the future. When we All right, so can we have now a vote, please, on what's been proposed and what's been seconded? All those in favour? Those against? We'll register Tim Groves was against the decision, and that's good that we have democracy and not everybody voting the same way all the time. Thank you very much, everybody, for an interesting and useful discussion. And certainly when we put that restriction in, we really did not realise what we were doing in terms of it being this drop dead at the end of it. Tony, thank you so very much for all you've done for us and for many, many occasions being, thoughtful, lucid, taking us through these things step by step. We really do appreciate that. And now can you tell us about the future with the transfer that's been referred to and the movement across to Hampshire County Council, which we're on the whole very saddened by, of course.
Yes, of course. So from the 1st of April, your voice for restrictions on the highway, anything that will require a TRO on the highway will be via your county councillor. I think we know who that is from this evening.
Also Wayne Irish.
And Councillor Irish as well. Now, of course, I will still be there to give advice to our councillors. We also retain the traffic orders for parking, on off-street parking, street naming and numbering, and other licences on the highway, insurance concerns, etc. So in the next couple of weeks, I'll be sending out a document to everybody to explain the new split between the county and Eastleigh Borough Council responsibility. In terms of taking this sort of work forward, Dragon's Teeth, that sort of thing, we have an agreement now with the county to consider minor works improvements. So that can be anything from a pedestrian crossing to additional gateway signage, that sort of thing. So I'll work closely with Ross on those requests that come from the committee. So we'll continue to work together on those sort of things. In terms of this restriction in particular, we'll come back to you with an options appraisal. We'll show you exactly what it would look like for both types of signage. We actually have our signage specialist in the room over there listening into this debate because we thought that might happen. So we will draw it up so you can see exactly what it will look like, and then we can make a decision after that. Okay.
Excellent. And thank you very much indeed again on behalf of all of the committee. Really appreciate all the energy and effort you put into looking after us so well in terms of making these things happen. So we now move to the Legal Services Manager's report. Oh, okay. Planning appeals.
I move
Thank
that they
you.
be noted.
Cheers then. Bye-bye. Thank you for coming. Okay,
So I move that we note the appeals.
there we go. We've noted the appeals. So we're now moving to the Legal Services Manager's report. That's it? Wow. So we're all done. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for our audience and keeping us on our toes. And thank you very much to fellow councillors for the constructive and business-like way in which we've conducted this meeting. Good night.